to words. His conversation was gay and affable. He put himself on a level with the two old women who had passed their lives beside him. When he laughed, it was the laugh of a schoolboy. Madame Magloire liked to call him Your Grace, Votre Grandeur. One day he rose from his armchair, and went to his library in search of a book. This book was on one of the upper shelves. As the bishop was rather short of stature, he could not reach it. "Madame Magloire," said he, "fetch me a chair. My greatness, grandeur, does not reach as far as that shelf."
One of his distant relatives, Madame la Comtesse de Lô, rarely allowed an opportunity to escape of enumerating, in his presence, what she designated as the expectations of her 3 sons. She had numerous relatives, who were very old and near to death, and of whom her sons were the natural heirs. The youngest of the 3 was to receive from a grand-aunt a good 100,000 livres of income, the second was the heir by entail to the title of the duke, his uncle, the eldest was to succeed to the peerage of his grandfather. The bishop was accustomed to listen in silence to these innocent and pardonable maternal boasts. On one occasion, however, he appeared to be more thoughtful than usual, while Madame de Lô was relating once again the details of all these inheritances and all these expectations. She interrupted herself impatiently. "Mon Dieu, cousin. What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking," replied the bishop, "of a singular remark, which is to be found, I believe, in Saint Augustine, 'Place your hopes in the man from whom you do not inherit.'"
At another time, on receiving a notification of the decease of a gentleman of the countryside, wherein not only the dignities of the dead man, but also the feudal and noble qualifications of all his relatives, spread over an entire page, "What a stout back death has," he exclaimed. "What a strange burden of titles is cheerfully imposed on him, and how much wit must men have, in order thus to press the tomb into the service of vanity." He was gifted, on occasion, with a gentle raillery, which almost always concealed a serious meaning. In the course of one Lent, a youthful vicar came to D, and preached in the cathedral. He was tolerably eloquent. The subject of his sermon was charity. He urged the rich to give to the poor, in order to avoid hell, which he depicted in the most frightful manner of which he was capable, and to win paradise, which he represented as charming and desirable. Among the audience there was a wealthy retired merchant, who was somewhat of a usurer, named M. Geberand, who had amassed 2 millions in the manufacture of coarse cloth, serges, and woolen galloons. Never in his whole life had M. Geberand bestowed alms on any poor wretch. After the delivery of that sermon, it was observed that he gave a sou every Sunday to the poor old beggar women at the door of the cathedral. There were 6 of them to share it. One day the bishop caught sight of him in the act of bestowing this charity, and said to his sister, with a smile, "There is M. Geberand purchasing paradise for a sou."
When it was a question of charity, he was not to be rebuffed even by a refusal, and on such occasions he gave utterance to remarks which induced reflection. Once he was begging for the poor in a drawing-room of the town. There was present the Marquis de Champtercier, a wealthy and avaricious old man, who contrived to be, at one and the same time, an ultra-royalist and an ultra-Voltairian. This variety of man has actually existed. When the bishop came to him, he touched his arm. "You must give me something, le Marquis." The Marquis turned round and answered dryly, "I have poor people of my own, Monseigneur." "Give them to me," replied the bishop. One day he preached the following sermon in the cathedral.
"My very dear brethren, my good friends, there are 1,320,000 peasants' dwellings in France which have but 3 openings, 1,817,000 hovels which have but 2 openings, the door and 1 window, and 346,000 cabins besides which have but 1 opening, the door. And this arises from a thing which is called the tax on doors and windows. Just put poor families, old women and little children, in those buildings, and behold the fevers and maladies which result. Alas! God gives air to men, the law sells it to them. I do not blame the law, but I bless God. In the department of the Isère, in the Var, in the 2 departments of the Alpes, the Hautes, and the Basses, the peasants have not even wheelbarrows, they transport their manure on the backs of men, they have no candles, and they burn resinous sticks, and bits of rope dipped in pitch. That is the state of affairs throughout the whole of the hilly country of Dauphine. They make bread for 6 months at one time, they bake it with dried cow dung. In the winter they break this bread up with an axe, and they soak it for 24 hours, in order to render it eatable. My brethren, have pity. Behold the suffering on all sides of you.
Born a Provençal, he easily familiarized himself with the dialect of the south. He said, N.B. Musu, say sage, as in Lower Languedoc, Antanaras passa, as in the Basses Alpes, Port un bouen mutuembi un bouen fromage grace, as in Upper Dauphine. This pleased the people extremely, and contributed not a little to win him access to all spirits. He was perfectly at home in the thatched cottage and in the mountains. He understood how to say the grandest things in the most vulgar of idioms. As he spoke all tongues, he entered into all hearts. Moreover, he was the same towards people of the world and towards the lower classes. He condemned nothing in haste and without taking circumstances into account. He said, examine the road over which the fault has passed. Being, as he described himself with a smile, an ex-sinner, he had none of the asperities of austerity, and he professed, with a good deal of distinctness, and without the frown of the ferociously virtuous, a doctrine which may be summed up as follows.
Man has upon him his flesh, which is at once his burden and his temptation. He drags it with him and yields to it. He must watch it, check it, repress it, and obey it only at the last extremity. There may be some fault even in this obedience, but the fault thus committed is venial. It is a fall, but a fall on the knees which may terminate in prayer. To be a saint is the exception, to be an upright man is the rule. Err, fall, sin if you will, but be upright. The least possible sin is the law of man. No sin at all is the dream of the angel. All which is terrestrial is subject to sin. Sin is a gravitation. When he saw everyone exclaiming very loudly, and growing angry very quickly, "Oh! Oh!" he said, with a smile, "to all appearance, this is a great crime which all the world commits. These are hypocrisies which have taken fright, and are in haste to make protest and to put themselves under shelter." He was indulgent towards women and poor people, on whom the burden of human society rests. He said, the faults of women, of children, of the feeble, the indigent, and the ignorant, are the fault of the husbands, the fathers, the masters, the strong, the rich, and the wise.
He said, moreover, teach those who are ignorant as many things as possible. Society is culpable, in that it does not afford instruction gratis, it is responsible for the night which it produces. This soul is full of shadow, sin is therein committed. The guilty one is not the person who has committed the sin, but the person who has created the shadow. It will be perceived that he had a peculiar manner of his own of judging things. I suspect that he obtained it from the gospel. One day he heard a criminal case, which was in preparation and on the point of trial, discussed in a drawing room. A wretched man, being at the end of his resources, had coined counterfeit money, out of love for a woman, and for the child which he had had by her. Counterfeiting was still punishable with death at that epoch. The woman had been arrested in the act of passing the first false piece made by the man. She was held, but there were no proofs except against her. She alone could accuse her lover, and destroy him by her confession. She denied, they insisted. She persisted in her denial. Thereupon an idea.